Well, thank you for joining us. My name is Madeleine. I run all things partnerships at NationBuilder. We are a campaign software used by political parties, advocacy groups, unions to effectively mobilize and organize communities. And yes, welcome to this conversation about pointing to the screen, but it's not behind me, the future of membership. So over the past 6 months, Brand Response and NationBuilder have supported independent research across unions, political parties, civil society organizations, you name it, to understand how membership is shifting in a very rapidly changing and digitally saturated world. And so with me today, I've got Rebekah, who is head of partnerships and content at the Better Politics Foundation. They come to the subject of membership through two lenses. So first through their work with political leaders and political parties, but also as the convener of the Political Leadership Entrepreneur Network, which is a group of more than 140 organizations and individuals who work to improve politics around the world. And then I've also got Sam, who has founded Brand Response. They are a consulting practice that deliver strategy, creative, and digital solutions for the mobilizing supporters, growing movements, and driving real impact in the world. And they've worked in over 30 countries with over 80 partners, raised more than 70 million. Don't want to inflate the numbers too much. 70 million euros via Smart Raise. And so before we head into the conversation, I sort of want to set the stage a bit with some of the top findings that came about when drafting the report that was uncovered when we surveyed over 22 membership leaders representing more than 300,000 members across Europe. So firstly, recruitment isn't the problem. Engagement is. So most leaders will say that their numbers are either growing or are stable, that they aren't actually active. Only a very, very small fraction of organizations told us that their members are actively engaged, whether that's signing petitions, being engaged in campaigns. And so what this tells us is that leaders are basically building lists rather than movements. So we saw this in the report, but I also wanted to get a sense from the audience here. Have anyone here, and raise your hand, so folks who have worked in campaigns with members, did you experience a membership surge after a key protest, a key campaign, a moment that went viral? So if you wanted to raise your hand. Okay, great. And well, no, keep your hands up and be honest in this second part. For that surge that you saw, were you then able to turn that initial interest into sustained participation? Be honest. Okay. Yeah, I'm seeing the hands go down a bit. So that gap there is something that we're trying to solve. And clearly you are not alone. An example that we uncovered is that a group, they got overnight 5,000 new members after a key protest, but they essentially lost those members as well once the dust settled. And there's really no doubt that organizations can recruit around campaigns and crises. What they can't do is convert that surge into sustained participation. Secondly, organizations are systematically underinvesting in the systems that would allow to fix this. So another raising of the hands, when you're thinking about allocating budget within your campaigns, when would you say you prioritize, or actually, I'm going to rephrase that, who here prioritizes more money towards membership management as opposed to campaigning and advocacy and mobilization efforts? No one. That is pretty telling. Only in our findings, we saw that only 18% of the 22 surveyed dedicated more of their budget to membership management. It was clear that more than half of the budgets of the folks that we spoke to went to all things campaign advocacy. Only 5% of those people found a perfect balance between membership management and then general campaigning efforts. So the top challenge that was uncovered in the findings is that this was pretty much due to limited staff and resources. We'll take questions at the end, if that's okay. Yeah, thanks. And so it's clear that we have an engagement crisis, but we're starving the infrastructure. So the onboarding, the relationship building, the member experience design that would convert all of the interest that you are getting during these key moments into that sustained participation that is needed to grow a movement. And thirdly, this is the final before I head into the conversation. When organizations, they invest in the right things, we know what works. So 56% of folks who we spoke to said that referrals from existing members were the key drivers of recruitment. So not digital advertising, not social media, human trust and human recommendation were the key ingredients for all things recruitment. And so when asked how members like to participate, community spaces like WhatsApp and Discord, they really topped the list. And so this tells us that relationship and reputation, they drive growth, but trust, community, connection are the things that will fuel long-term engagement. But we uncovered a bit of a disconnect because when asked what's the main value of membership, they would tell us financial sustainability, political leverage, mobilization capacity were the things that were most important to them, whereas very few selected community and social value. And so what this tells us is that organizations are prioritizing money and mobilization capacity, whereas what members care about is identity and social value and just all things community. Community is the product that people want to purchase when they're becoming members. And so to just finalize this section very quickly, there's no doubt that organizations can recruit and mobilize, but the infrastructure in between, so the relationships, the member experience, the belonging is seriously underfunded and underdesigned. And that's what we're exploring today. How can membership organizations shift the way that they approach recruitment, engagement? And I'm going to kick off the conversation by going to you, Rebekah. So that first data point whereby more than half of the organizations that we spoke to said members aren't active. When organizations are gaining 5,000 new members from one day to the next, what's missing when they suddenly lose them? How can they get people to stay?
Yeah, what's missing? The answer is probably numerous things. And these are lessons that we are still learning. I will say that now. We are not perfect at this. But, you know, our CEO, Lisa Witter, has a background in behavioral science. So we always try to kind of think about that. And I'm just wondering whether the type of membership we're after is membership as habit. And we actually know from behavioral science, like what goes into building a habit. So you need something like a cue or a trigger. You need a behavior, which you could also call repetition, depending. And then you have rewards. So that can be, we're talking about belonging, sense of community. It can be social standing, could be financial in some cases, right? Depends on the habit. So let's think about political parties. In case of political parties, it could be a cue, could be an upcoming election or a particularly contentious issue. The behavior they might want to create is people turning up for meetings, volunteering for them. The reward they think is potentially maybe they will feel belonging, the people that are taking part, but that the issue will be fixed, right? But if it was that easy, then like we wouldn't have this problem. There's also other factors that go into especially moving cue, I think, to behavior. The reward, you know, you can manufacture. And the most important is, have you created a stable, supportive environment for your members to move from cue to behavior? So in the case of political parties, they probably want a cue to ignite donating at least 10 euros a month. And they also want it to create you showing up to meetings and volunteering potentially, right? But the thing is, if I am ignited by a cue, but I don't have at least 10 euros a month, then you've already lost me at number one. And if I do have 10 euros a month, but I have 2 kids under 7 and I have a full-time job and you want me to come to a physical meeting on a weekday, then that is just not meeting your members where they are at. You have not created a supportive environment within the political party or the organization for them to participate. And that's even before we get to whether the perceived reward is good enough to justify going to the meeting in the first place. So I think that's the kind of things, and we've made those mistakes before as well with the PLEN, which I can talk about more probably later. But when we're talking about belonging, which I know you've already mentioned, it's definitely important and foundational, but it's a reward. And sometimes it's a reward that then goes back and helps drive behavior, but it is not, there's more to it before we get to that point.
I love the framing that the first point of action is just meeting members where they're at. It seems simple, but it's quite complex, but it's necessary. Sam, you've worked on D66's recent campaign, so a progressive victory with a strong emphasis on membership. How did they enable that conversion from initial campaign interest to sustained participation?
No, it's a great point. Especially the time versus money aspect that you were talking about really played a lot into this, I think, as well as, of course, having a very handsome candidate always helps, right, to actually get that sort of spike initially. But no, I think in D66's case, a lot of the spike was driven by what people were against rather than what necessarily they were for, not to discount D66's campaign in any way. But once they actually got the interest, they captured people's attention. They did a really radical thing. They asked their members what they wanted. So they actually asked people. And this was the first step in actually engaging them. And they didn't have this, at the point where that interest was, the media, the key point of that media spike. 18 months before, me and my team had gone through personas, data models, building out what those workflows were going to be. So they had a system in place in order to capture that and convert it into both money and time, right? So how do they do this? And I always kind of, because we get to work with a lot of different campaigns, and it's remarkable. I can tell within 15 minutes of meeting a client whether they'll be able to actually achieve this. And it's really about the culture. The team were able to express an idea, and they were not knocked down by the hierarchy. They were able to execute it. They were able to iterate and experiment freely. And this was absolutely key. The culture eats the strategy. And this, the strategy then informs the tactics that you use. In terms of kind of the actual tech stack, I wanted to mention a couple of things that they did really well, and kind of, I don't know, hacks, if you like. One was like really, really focusing on design. So a lot of people are, we're all going through this kind of, tech always goes in these kind of hype waves, right? We're now in the AI hype wave. But focusing back on just the fundamentals of making it easy to join, easy to take part, and having buttons and places that older people can actually participate in and understand the UX, right? This was really key. We got rid of passwords. This is, again, was like, so on all of the places that you needed to log in to be a member, we killed passwords. We used one touch. We used like biometric logins, and we used email one-time passwords. People absolutely, that's my one takeaway is member portals never get used. And then there's no point gamifying them if people don't actually log in, right? The second kind of hack that worked really well was getting rid of the fixed fee myth for membership. So why are you asking people for $20, €20, €30, €50? With D66, we had a number of members giving €10,000 a year. And they were able to, and they were happy to, because they saw the moment, they met the moment with that generosity, and we just completely shattered the myth that you have to have any fixed tiers. So from €5 to 10,000 euros, you could have these different membership rates. So yeah, I think my takeaway on this question would be like, you need to invest in design, and that design needs to allow people to move fluidly between all of the different roles that members play in an organization, and have the culture to be able to implement it.
Yeah, as little bottlenecks as possible, and also kind of just do now, apologize later, hope for the best, and try something rather than just wait for everything to execute perfectly. Rebekah, you told me that you were interested in the fact that our report included capacity building as a way to retain members. Why did this hit home to you?
Because it very much reflects what we've seen with our political leadership entrepreneur network, and also with what we are thinking around political parties. So the Political Leadership Entrepreneur Network, it's about 140 organizations from 43 countries. But what they all almost have in common is they're usually very small teams working with very little money and very little time. So when we first started convening this network, we said, congratulations, we've convened a network. Now go do all these things, have meetings on the side, come to our monthly meetings. And it just didn't happen. And they told us very frankly, like, we don't have the time and we don't have the capacity. So in that case, we really hadn't thought about providing a supportive environment, which I said political parties are not doing. We also did not do it. But what we have seen is that they want to still share knowledge with each other, and they want to learn. So we're currently piloting a learning management system, which, despite the fact that it has a password, seems to be fine for the moment, at least with this pilot group, though we did also consider, crap, we have to have a password. That's also something we're thinking about. And it's a learning 6-month program, but that's completely asynchronous. So they just have a playbook that they can go through as they want. And that has stuff about, best practice on fundraising, curriculum, because most of them are doing political training, communication stuff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we also think that this is something that could be useful for political parties, a place for them to either found new political training programs or to reassess the ones that they already have, go through what they have as far as political leadership development. It's a little bit challenging for us because we are a nonpartisan organization, but we're committed to finding kind of models where we're not favoring one party over another.
And I guess I want to continue on this thread of belonging as the product. Our research found that there's a fundamental misalignment. So organizations, they continue to pitch transactional benefits. So pay us X amount and you will get this physical thing in return. But we found that members, especially younger ones, they want to live out their identity, live out their values, and community is the product now that people purchase or want to purchase when they choose to be a member of an organization, a political party. Sam, were you surprised to find that the folks that we were speaking to, they didn't necessarily have attracting young members as a priority on their list? Because I used to be an account manager at NationBuilder, and customers would always come to me asking, how on earth do we get younger members not only invested, but interested in what we're trying to put out in the world? And so I was pretty surprised by that finding, that it's just not really a priority for folks.
Yeah, no, it was somewhat surprising, but then also I think aging membership came out at the same level. But one of the number one issues that I think was related was cost of living pressures. That was like double right now. So, and I think that's maybe connected to the youth question, in the sense that young people are not really willing to pay for membership because they can express their identity in other ways. So there's like so much more on offer that they can do. And then I think like, it's creating inside membership organizations adjacent spaces, because it's really unattractive if you're a young person coming into a room of like 50-year-old white men who've been there for like 20 years. So I think like creating these adjacent spaces and these subgroups and identity-based caucuses for people is like really key to this question. But yeah, it was interesting to me how like cost of living was like double, but I think adjacent, probably the same
linked.
related question.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rebekah, your network created that sense of belonging among organizations worldwide. Do you want to walk us through how you designed for that? What were the intentional choices in choosing that pathway?
Yeah, I mean, I want to say it took a while, and I don't think that we really cracked it until last year when we brought about 50 of them together to Berlin. And that was really the aha moment, I think, for everyone. And one of my colleagues came out of that and she said, I realize what this network is now. It's an antidote to loneliness. So when we were designing that get-together, which my colleague Ison, who is out the back, I'll point at him, everyone look at him and make him feel weird. He was thinking very much about, again, the fact that these people are operating with very little money in spaces where they're usually the only person sometimes in the whole country who is doing exactly this kind of work. So we wanted to alleviate that loneliness, but also share resources, understanding. So just designing for them to meet as many people as possible while also doing practical things. So that's changing the group sizes throughout the 3 days or whatever, but also making sure that the workshops you're doing is not just a talk fest, but they're actually practically creating something out of the end that's going to be useful for them. And I have to say that was actually, not to be soppy, but very emotional. Like there were tears. When you get in there, you realize just how shared experiences can be. I wasn't expecting the fact that some of our members have been arrested in the last 12 months, and that actually there were numerous members who had been arrested in the last 12 months because of their political work. And so for them to be able to share that together. And you're talking about adjacent spaces. I mean, we saw those being created kind of organically. For instance, the groups that are working on women's political leadership went and had their own lunch. The Latin American group was doing their own bar catch up. And like a lady, I think she's from Zimbabwe, said, like, I found an international sisterhood here. So, I don't want to say that, because it's expensive, but I don't want to say that you have to bring people physically together to create a community. Obviously, you can make international communities, but it might be slower and it might be a different depth. So if you can encourage your members to create their own organic meetups, I do think people-to-people meetings are still important.
Yeah, and that segues us nicely into using digital as an enabler for that. I think that we've seen the most successful digital strategies are the ones that strengthen human connection rather than replace it. And a very straightforward example of that we uncovered in the research is this organization that organized picnics everywhere. So using online to coordinate local offline meetups. And so Sam, you've implemented digital infrastructure across multiple campaigns. Where have you seen that tech is best used when genuinely enhancing these human relationships and human relationship building between these folks?
Yeah, so in the campaigns, well, I think first of the campaigns that we've worked on, a lot of examples, tech actually takes us away from relationships. It gets in the way of relationships. Where I've seen it working best is an example would be like the European election campaigns last time around in 2024. I personally trained 3,000 volunteers for that campaign over the course of a year. And what I saw was the best use of technology was to actually train them to use simple tools. Like, for example, we train them in power mapping and then how to scale that with WhatsApp. And what they needed to feel was like real ownership over how they did it, and making sure that that was kind of communicated through capacity building in that training. I think where you end up with, tech getting in the way is, I think the Mamdani versus Cuomo lesson, where you saw a candidate who was using technology in such a natural, fluid way, versus one who was using ChatGPT to generate policy and having AI backdrops and all this kind of thing. So people see that as basically low effort. And if I'm going to take the time to read something, I want you to have actually written it and actually understand what you're telling me. And I think this is the core. It's about connecting with people on that human level, giving them the tools to then amplify for you and empower each other in the way that they want to do it. And that will be, with the European elections example, we had people, doing dog walking to votes, picnics, dinners. We didn't ask people to do one particular activity. It was a kind of a range. And I think that's the key point is you need to think about the end result in terms of where you want to get, not the tech necessarily to get there. So in our case, it was peer-to-peer recruitment we realized was like the most powerful factor, that people are going to trust people. And so, actually creating a way for that organic process to work, training them. And then I guess one practical tip is like actually measuring it. So having recruiter links, having metrics where you measure organic recruitment. It's very easy to track paid and it's very easy to track clicks, right? But the impact of that on actually getting people to do stuff like vote is very, very minimal. But you get rewarded because you can say, well, I signed up 10,000 people to my petition. So what? Right? If you've trained 10 volunteers and they've talked to 10 other people and they've talked to 100 other people, and you have this sort of snowflake of people who are actually having real world conversations, that will drive your campaign much further. And I think it gets us into the next mobilization point, right? Yeah,
and just how people are so focused on vanity metrics as well. And I think that Cuomo example just screams inauthenticity, and authentic is just so important when it comes to thinking about leadership. And so our data also showed that, members, they expect to move fluidly between online and offline spaces. That's a desire of theirs. And so with a global network like yours, Rebekah, you must be navigating digital constantly. And so where have you found that mapping technology to members' needs works best versus where it falls flat?
It goes back to, surprisingly, you can ask them. Which you said before with political parties. I mean, I think at the start, again, we had all of these ideas and we could have platforms and blah, blah, blah. But then when we just asked them, they said, we want a WhatsApp group. So we created a WhatsApp group. And now they share all their stuff on there. It's become a place for like country political updates, personal updates, people saying Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, it's very nice. But that's what they told us they wanted, especially out of this gathering. I would also say, despite, it's obviously 43 countries, so we have to be online. We get a lot of information from social media. Also a reward, I suppose, of being in the network is that we're able to leverage our funder networks for them. So we amplify their stuff on social media, etc. But despite that, it's still very human and peer-to-peer connections. For example, they know us by name. They know the Better Politics Foundation people by name. If they're in town, my colleagues, a few are in town for the summit, they've been on lunches with them, stuff like that. And we do have this LMS now, which is digital, which was a concern around the password, but that small friction does seem to be okay for them at the moment. The reward is justifying that. And of course, we do have emails because they've told us that emails is actually still a good way to communicate with them. But we've tried to limit the kind of mass marketing emails just to amplify that human-to-human touch again.
I mean, we uncovered in the data that email is how folks are engaged with by over 90%. So it's still relevant, but it shouldn't take away from the power of human connection, trust, recommendation, all the things that we've been talking about. I think we're nearly running out of time. And so starting to close out the conversation by opening up the floor to everyone here, but also asking you a very, very simple question is, how are you managing membership, or how have you come across membership as it relates to the campaigns that you've worked on? But yeah, we're also very happy to answer any questions that you might have. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. That was really interesting. So something I'm interested in from lived experience of joining a political party as a member, leaving, and then joining a new party as a member and feeling like a moment's been missed. So signed up as a member, so I wasn't surprised in the report, the finding of membership isn't invested in long term as much as like just driving it as an initial kind of like metric to speak. So what I'm interested in is what you'd recommend, or if there's any findings that relate to how can, parties or any sort of organization that has kind of missed the moment. Like I've also signed up as a volunteer and still not heard anything. So what would you recommend that, parties could do to like almost retrospectively be like, what can I do to now, go back and say, sorry, you've been here, you've given for 4 months now. Yeah, I'm just interested. So I wasn't surprised by that kind of finding, but also just interested what you would kind of speak to on that.
I'd love to hear from you on that, but I would more like to share my personal experience also joining a party, and then I actually technically haven't left yet, but I might leave. And that is, I joined up, and actually I was surprised. They had obviously done some work on creating a frictionless sign up. There was no set membership fee. I could choose what it was. Actually, my local chapter head reached out to me via email very quickly. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then what got me, instead of the delayed communication, is that actually I had to go physically to a meeting at a weird time on a weekday. So every party seems to work very differently. They're all kind of their own strange, beautiful little cultures. I was going to say weird, but beautiful little cultures. And at the Better Politics Foundation, what we would actually really like to do is work with people in specific countries and say, let's do a mapping of your political parties. And for us, we're in the political leadership, and their pathways to power, how membership starts from the start to, okay, I now want to learn more about politics in the party. Maybe I want to run for office. What does that pathway look like? So for us, we're very much still in a way towards the start of that, because they are such unusual and almost unique places in themselves. But yeah, I feel like my suggestion to them would be map all of the kind of friction points that new members are coming across. Maybe not even new, throughout a member's entire journey, because you and I have both had the same experience, but we actually have very different friction points.
No, I think that's all great points. I think members play so many different roles, and they also have this like if you've signed up as a member and what you did, this is a very, very like high value thing to have done. And you need a high value response to that effort that you put in, right? You're expressing your identity in that point where you've joined, and you're saying, I align with these values. So one, and again, it comes back to this peer-to-peer. So you need someone else to one-to-one directly do that conversation, have that conversation with you, in a way that's not scripted, in a way that's what is your motivation for joining, finding out in a way that is not just a survey, but actually a human conversation. And we did this a lot in different campaigns. And one example I'd give in the European elections was I actually reached out to this lady who joined our platform, and she was a 60-year-old lady. She was so amazed that I actually bothered to actually pick up the phone and speak to her, that she came to every single meeting from that point onwards. Every time we then, and I was tracking this on our system, every time we asked for money, she gave 250 euros on every email. And she signed up, and she'd call people. And I actually called her and said, you don't need to give money every time I send you an email. It's fine. You're also recruiting from other people, But that's the power of just that simple human connection, the fact that you need to honor that someone has taken that very high value step of saying, I align with your values.
The one aspect is kind of missing from the conversation, at least from my perspective, which is demographics. A lot of organizations in Europe, also especially in Germany, they have an aging membership, an aging donor base, aging volunteer base. And I feel like this aspect, okay, how can younger people get recruited and get engaged, is not really been talked about a lot yet. Maybe you can shed some light on what you think are the right approaches and strategies to deal with that demographic change that is going to steamroll a lot of organizations if they don't really change what they do over the next 10, 20 years.
I can talk about this, but mostly through just the Better Politics Foundation. We're always coming from the perspective of the political leader. So I'm thinking about how do parties kind of choose who becomes in their internal leadership, but also inevitably who runs for office. Again, parties are all different. But we do see a theme of parties at least paying lip service to the fact that they understand that they need to have young talent and be elevating them, and that they maybe need to look different to what they have previously. But then sometimes we go to political parties and say, look, all these political training programs around the world have managed to capture the attention of people who are outside of the party system so far, and they want to become political leaders. Here's a list of them. But they say, well, yeah, we want them to be different, but we also want them to be loyal. So we would prefer if the diversity comes from within the party. But of course, that is not probably going to happen. And so that's just something that I see a lot. I think they will have no choice but to change, or they will die out. And I mean, we are seeing this around the world. I come from a country where one of the two major parties that has dominated for 80 years is now for the first time polling worse than a party very much to the right of them. Does that sound familiar? It's not the UK or anywhere in Europe. It's in Australia. And for the first time, that party next election will run candidates in every single electorate. And I can assure you that not all of them would have been long-term party members. They are going to have been nurses, former factory workers, some random guy who just is well known in the community, and people are going to relate to them because they know what the issues are in their community and they're going to frame them with their worldview. So it gets, essentially, there seems to still be a little bit of a disconnect between what they know or say they need and what's able to be achieved. And I think that comes back to the culture within the party that you were saying. It completely depends on the culture within the party and if you're able to be different, essentially.
I would also add to that I completely agree. But if you actually capture people on the issue, and you kind of, especially you were talking about younger audiences and parties dying out. I think that if they don't have to love the organization, but they may love one issue and they may love it enough and the candidate or the local organization to actually join and become a member. And if you need to be prepared for that and you need to have a strategy around what those issues are and be listening to what young people want, right? So I think you can create these kind of new front doors to the organization. And people don't have to love everything about the organization, right? It may be driven by what's the alternative, right? So, and also I think people at different stages, there was it's a crisis of kind of young people joining. You do need to engage with young people, but those young people they're not young people forever, right? Their values, their needs change over time. So I think having an offer and allowing a way in is fine. And then whether if you have no strategy, you are going to die. But I think it's making sure that you have an offer for them, but I don't think you need to completely panic about it.
And can I just say something as well? Because I don't want to seem dismissive of political parties because, there is such a thing as people coming into political parties and completely ruining them. And I think we've seen pretty prominent examples of that in the last 10 years. So it is a serious thing, and maybe that's something also for us to work on conceptually. Like, how do parties know when someone is not totally in love with everything of the organization, but is an ultimate good, versus someone who has the potential to come in and be a wrecker?
Hi, sorry, my voice is a bit broken. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on membership. I wonder, what is a member? Like, what's the definition of membership you have in mind? Like, coming from an NGO that doesn't have like this classical member thing like a party or a union has, and many NGOs have that. Are your insights still valid for these kinds of supporters that don't say, I sign up as a member, here's my membership card, but you know, who are on the list, who engage, who maybe donate? Is that like a different kind of, do you consider this membership as well? Do your insights still hold up to this kind of engagement?
So yeah, I think it's a great point. It was one, like, we were having this conversation 15 years ago when I was in the Liberal Democrats. Like, how do we define what a member is? Where do we set the benchmark for membership? Do we have associate membership? Do we have free membership? Like, how do you set this up? And in a way, it's less about, I don't know, for me, it's less about how it's defined, but it's about how people can move between different roles and what they want to do in terms of leadership in the organization. So it should, for me, like, it's kind of an irrelevance. It's like, choose your own adventure within the organization. And I don't think members need to be paying necessarily. I think you've got to have something that they get, that members, like, it's naturally an exclusive term, right? So this can be a positive, but it can also be a negative for some people. So I think it's very fluid. There is no definition, in my view. But of course, lots of traditional parties have this very specific definition around, you know, their democratic and legal structures, which can be quite an impediment, because it means you can't then engage people in a way that you want to, and it creates these kind of almost siloed tracks through organizations.
Yeah, and I think the data also uncovered that membership is no longer seen as a transactional relationship. As it evolves, so do our definitions of it. And my personal belief is that anyone who chooses to be a leader within your movement and act on your behalf is this revamped version of what would have been previously called a member.
Yeah, for us, as far as the Political Leadership Entrepreneur Network, you're a member if you want to be. There's no membership fee or anything. So it's a very simple definition. But yeah, when I first got asked to be on this panel and I was thinking about the PLEN, I was thinking, is that a membership organizer? But of course it is, because even though we don't charge fees, but people want to be involved. So they are.
Cool. I think we're out of time, but thank you very much for your questions, for your time. I hope this was a helpful conversation. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the Tech Summit.